Welcome back, everyone. Last time, we left Ceres in chaos, and the shadows of the past were stirring. Tonight, the mystery deepens, and the hunt begins. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more episodes. Soren Vale stepped into the quiet halls of Lord Brennar's estate, his boots muffled against the cold marble floors. Aric Dawnfire, still full of energy and questions, followed closely behind, his eyes darting around as if expecting a clue to materialize at every turn. Soren's gaze was fixed, his expression unreadable as they passed ornate tapestries depicting ancient battles, their vibrant colors now dulled by the passage of time. The once thriving household was still, the servants hesitant and watchful as they moved through the rooms like ghosts. "Doctor," Aric urged softly, his voice barely more than a whisper in the stillness, "we have to start somewhere. If we wait too long, the trail will vanish." Soren gave a small nod, though his thoughts were already elsewhere. He wasn't just here as a doctor, he was here as someone who knew how to read between the lines. Every detail in this mansion mattered. The servants' nervous glances, the misplaced objects, the subtle tensions in the air. They reached the library, where Soren paused by a table littered with papers. His fingers brushed over a torn ledger, its ink smeared as if someone had tried to cover their tracks in haste. The missing pieces of a puzzle began to fit together in his mind. Someone wanted him to leave a message, Soren murmured, more to himself than to Aric. Aric, leaning in to examine the pages, frowned. A message? What kind of message? Soren didn't meet his eyes. Every movement in this house has been calculated. This wasn't a random attack. Someone powerful is behind this. They moved on, passing through hallways that felt too cold for the time of day. At the end of the corridor, a young maid was wiping down a table, her hands trembling slightly as she saw them approach. Soren regarded her quietly. "Did you see anyone near Lord Brennar's chambers last night?" The maid's eyes darted nervously before she looked away, her voice barely a murmur. I thought I saw Master Daretha's squire leaving the room, sir, but he disappeared before I could call out to him." Aric's eyes lit up, the first spark of hope in the investigation. A squire? That could be a lead. Soren, however, was already focused on something else. The name Dareth was familiar to him. That name had been spoken in whispers years ago, a name tied to political power and dangerous games. He pushed the thought aside for the moment. This wasn't the time to dwell on the past. They continued their search, moving into the dining hall where remnants of last night's feast still lay scattered on the long oak table. The heavy scent of stale food hung in the air, but it was the goblet near the end of the table that caught Soren's attention. The cup was oddly stained, its rim blackened in a way that didn't seem natural. He leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he steadied the goblet. "This isn't ordinary poison. It's crafted, something older, meant to hide itself from the common eye." Aric leaned closer, his face pale. "Are you saying the killers are still in the house?" Soren stood straight, his cloak swishing softly as he turned to face the boy. He didn't speak immediately, his mind working over the implications of what they had uncovered. The truth was closer than they realized, but there were still pieces of the puzzle yet to fall into place. "We'll find out soon enough," Soren said quietly, his voice colder than it had been before. "But whoever did this, they're watching us, and we're not alone in this game." They both turned toward the window, where the first light of dawn was creeping across the town of Ceres, casting long shadows on the stone streets. Soren's gaze lingered on the rising sun, but his thoughts were elsewhere, on the path that lay ahead, one that would lead them into a dangerous game of politics, poison, and hidden enemies. A game he had once played and thought he had left behind. But the past had a way of returning. And in that moment, Soren Vale knew he was already too deep to turn back. Soren's hand hovered over the edge of the small wooden box, his fingers brushing the soft fabric that lined its interior. It had been left among the remnants of the dinner party, too inconspicuous to be a simple mistake, but too carefully placed to be overlooked. Aric stood nearby, his eyes wide with curiosity, but Soren's focus was fixed entirely on the object in front of him. The small bundle of dried leaves was wrapped tightly in cloth, its distinct smell wafting faintly in the air. He didn't need to touch it to know exactly what it was. "This is no common herb," Soren muttered, his voice low. "It's a rare flower, found only in a few secret corners of the martial world." Aric stepped forward, trying to get a closer look. "What is it?" Soren carefully unwrapped the cloth, revealing the delicate petals of the Shuraf blossom, a flower so rare and potent that only the highest-ranking martial sects kept it within their hidden vaults. It was known for its ability to enhance concentration and healing, but when used improperly, it could create an insidious poison, one that slowly suffocated the victim's life force. "Shuraf blossom," Soren said, the name hanging heavily in the air. His voice was quiet, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I haven't seen this flower in years. Not since the Iron Wind Order." The words sent a chill through him, the memories rushing back like a tidal wave he could no longer hold back. The Iron Wind Order had once been his world, his family. The most powerful martial sect in the dominion of Serethis, feared and respected by all. But the order had been destroyed, shattered by betrayal, its leaders scattered or lost. Soren had been forced to abandon it, forced to disappear, leaving behind the sword that had once defined him. Aric tilted his head. "Iron Wind Order? What's that?" Soren's gaze darkened, his mind drifting back to the blood-soaked fields of his past. "It was my former sect. I was once its leader, before everything changed." Aric's eyes widened in disbelief. "You were the leader of a martial sect?" Soren didn't answer immediately. He couldn't, there was too much pain tied to that chapter of his life. Instead, he placed the Shuraf blossom carefully into the cloth, his hand steady despite the rising tension in his chest. The Shuraf blossom was a sacred flower, reserved only for the highest-ranking members of the Iron Wind Order, Soren continued, his voice steady, though the memories threatened to pull him under. "We used it in our healing practices, but its true power lies in its poison. It's slow, insidious, but once it takes hold, it's almost impossible to reverse." Aric's brow furrowed. "So, this flower was used to poison Lord Brennar?" Soren stood up, his mind already racing. This flower didn't just find its way into his chambers by accident. Someone planted it here, and they know exactly what they're doing. Soren glanced toward the door, his thoughts darkening with each passing moment. The connections were becoming clearer, and yet, they led him into a maze he wasn't sure he wanted to navigate. Whoever had orchestrated this murder had ties to the martial world, to the very sect he had tried to leave behind. That means the people who are behind this, they're connected to my past. Aric, sensing the shift in the air, stood up straighter. "But why? Why would anyone from your past want to kill a nobleman?" Soren turned to face him, his gaze sharp and intense. "Because the Iron Wind Order was destroyed by betrayal. And whoever is responsible for this, they're sending a message. To me. And to anyone else who once stood beside me." His fingers clenched into fists, the weight of his old identity pressing heavily upon him. Soren Vale had thought he could bury Kael'ren, that he could escape the deadly world of martial politics and poisoned blades. But this murder, the use of the Shuraf blossom, was proof that his past had never truly let him go. "The Iron Wind Order had many enemies," Soren said, his voice colder now. "Rival sects, nobles, those who wanted to see us fall. And now, it seems they've come for me, one way or another." Aric stepped closer, his voice filled with determination. "What do we do next?" Soren took a long breath, his eyes narrowing as he looked toward the grand staircase that led to the higher floors of the estate. There were more answers to be found, more clues to uncover. But every step he took toward the truth would also bring him closer to the storm he had tried to escape. "We continue the investigation," Soren said, his voice firm. "But this time, we won't be just looking for answers. We'll be looking for the ones who think they can control the past. And when we find them," Soren's words trailed off, the unspoken thread hanging heavy in the air. The past was returning, and this time, there would be no running from it. Aric nodded, his resolve hardening. "Then we'll find them, and we'll make them answer for what they've done." With that, Soren turned and began walking toward the next room, Aric following closely behind. The investigation was far from over. But with each step, they were getting closer to uncovering the truth, and closer to the enemies who had been waiting for this moment. This version introduces the Iron Wind Order, gives more context to Soren Vale's past, and establishes the Shroff Blossom as the first major clue. It also sets up the rising tension between Soren's hidden identity and the new threats. Soren stood in the shadowed corner of the dimly lit room, the flickering torchlight casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. His breath was shallow, and the sharp ache in his chest had returned. He leaned against the cool stone, his eyes closed, trying to steady himself. He had felt the first pangs of weakness earlier in the day, but this was different. The poison was stirring again, crawling under his skin like an old, familiar threat. Each breath came harder than the last, each beat of his heart sending a sharp sting through his chest. His hands trembled slightly as they gripped the edge of the stone table before him. He had been able to keep it hidden so far, hiding his frailty behind the calm, steady facade of a wandering doctor. But now, with every passing hour, the poison seemed to grow stronger, gnawing away at his strength. The body he had once trusted, lean, powerful, swift, was betraying him, a cruel reminder of his fall from the warrior he once was. "Doctor, are you all right?" Aric's voice broke through the haze of pain that clouded Soren's thoughts. The boy had followed him into the small study without asking, as he always did. Soren opened his eyes and straightened up, forcing his shoulders back. He would not let Aric see his weakness. Not yet. Not ever. "I'm fine," Soren replied, his voice steady, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that betrayed the truth. The truth he would never speak aloud. He couldn't. Not yet. Aric's face creased with concern. He took a step closer, his brow furrowing. "You don't look fine. You've been like this all day. Is it the poison? You've been hiding it from me." Soren took a deep breath, his hand still gripping the table. "It's nothing," he said, brushing past Aric as he made his way to the shelf filled with medicinal herbs. "Just a reminder of old wounds. It'll pass." But it wouldn't pass. It never did. Aric's eyes were full of determination. "I don't understand. You're not weak. You were a great warrior once, weren't you? You can't keep hiding from your past." Soren stiffened, his jaw tightening at the mention of his old life. He hadn't wanted to hear it, didn't want to be reminded of the man he had once been. The man who had led the Iron Wind Order, the man who had wielded a blade with deadly precision. The man who had been invincible. But that man was gone. And in his place was a man broken by betrayal, poisoned by his enemies, forced to live as someone else, someone smaller, someone weaker. The weight of those years settled on Soren's shoulders as he reached for a jar on the shelf, his fingers brushing against the cool ceramic. He inhaled deeply, trying to steady the tremor in his hand. Aric, still watching, didn't let up. "You can't keep going like this, hiding your pain. You're not invincible anymore, are you?" Soren's heart clenched. The boy was too young to understand. Too eager to help but too unaware of the heavy burden that Soren carried. He had no idea what it was like to be haunted by a past that never let you rest. To be hunted by enemies you could no longer see but felt in every waking moment. "I told you before, Aric," Soren said, his voice quiet but firm. "Medicine isn't for the impatient. You need to learn patience." He turned toward the boy, forcing a smile. It was a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "And you need to understand your place. This isn't your fight." Aric stepped forward, his expression a mix of confusion and frustration. "I'm not afraid of a fight, Doctor. But I am afraid of losing you. You're the only one who can solve this mystery. I can't do it alone. We can't do it alone." Soren's chest tightened again, the familiar pain cutting deeper than before. He didn't want Aric to see how vulnerable he truly was. He didn't want Aric to know just how close to death he had already come, how many times he had almost succumbed to the poison coursing through his veins. But the boy's words struck something deep inside him, something he had buried for far too long, the desire to be needed, to be useful again. Soren's gaze softened for a moment, and for the first time, he allowed himself to see Aric as more than just a nuisance, more than just a reminder of the life he had left behind. Aric wasn't just an apprentice. He was the future, the hope that Soren had long since abandoned. Soren took a steadying breath, his voice quieter now. I'm not invincible, Aric. But I'm still capable of doing what needs to be done. I can't walk away from this. Not now. The weight of his past, the poison, the betrayal, the loss, pressed on him, but in this moment, he realized that Aric was not asking him to fight alone. He wasn't asking him to shoulder the burden by himself. The boy was offering to walk beside him, to help him. Soren felt the flicker of something inside him, something that had been dormant for years, begin to stir again, a sense of purpose. A sense of duty. You may not understand the cost of this fight, Soren said softly, but if you're truly willing to follow me into this, you must understand one thing: the past never stays buried. It always finds a way to drag you back. Aric nodded, his eyes unwavering. I'll follow you anywhere, Doctor. Soren paused for a long moment, feeling the weight of his words. He had once led men into battle, once wielded a sword as if it were an extension of his will. But now, his battles were different. His sword was hidden, his enemies masked by shadows, and his strength slowly fading. Yet, despite everything, he wasn't ready to let go just yet. I didn't want this for you, Soren said quietly. But now that you're here, I'll do what I must. For you and for everyone else who's in danger. Aric gave a small, determined smile. We'll do it together. Soren stood up straight, his expression hardening once more. Then let's begin. The air in Ceredis had grown heavy, the promise of something lurking beneath the surface palpable in the silence that stretched across the town. Soren Vale stood in the doorway of the noble estate, looking out at the city as the shadows of the evening stretched across the cobblestones. The investigation had taken them far, and yet they had only scratched the surface. Aric was still speaking to the servants, gathering more information, but Soren's thoughts had drifted back to something more dangerous, someone more dangerous. A figure moved in the distance, emerging from the edges of the marketplace as if summoned by the very tension in the air. He wore a dark cloak, the hood pulled low, his features obscured by the shadows. Soren's sharp eyes caught the slightest movement, the flicker of a familiar scar along the stranger's jaw. His heart skipped, but he forced himself to remain still. The figure did not notice him, and for a brief moment, Soren almost allowed himself to believe that his eyes had deceived him. But the feeling, the gut-deep recognition, was impossible to ignore. Darius Vane. Soren's past had just walked back into his life, and with it, the specter of everything he had tried to bury. The scar on Darius's jaw was a mark Soren would never forget, the reminder of a battle that had shaped both their fates. Once rivals, their bitter conflict had ended in a way that neither could walk away from without leaving a piece of themselves behind. Darius had been a dark mirror to Soren, a man who had once stood beside him, only to betray him when power became more important than loyalty. A betrayal that had left scars deeper than any sword could ever leave. Soren's hand clenched at his side, fingers itching for the hilt of a sword that was no longer there. The poison in his veins felt colder at the thought of Darius, as if the old wound stirred with the mere mention of his name. His mind flashed to the days when they had led armies together, before the poison, before the downfall of the Iron Wind Order, when they had been bound by more than just duty, by a shared purpose. But that was before everything fell apart. Now, Darius was nothing but a ghost of a past that Soren had long since abandoned. Yet, as the figure disappeared into the shadows of a narrow alleyway, a sense of dread settled over him. Darius hadn't come to Ceredis by chance. He wasn't here to revisit old wounds, he was here because the martial world's deadly politics were resurfacing. The very politics that had once torn apart everything Soren had fought to protect. Aric approached from behind, his voice cutting through the tension. "Doctor, you're staring at nothing. What's wrong?" Soren blinked, pushing the thoughts of Darius aside. "Nothing. Just a shadow from the past," he said, his voice low and controlled. Aric's eyes narrowed, but Soren didn't wait for a response. he turned, walking briskly back toward the heart of the estate. They had a case to solve, after all, though Soren knew the true danger had only just begun. Later that night, in the privacy of Soren's small quarters, the flickering of a single candle cast long shadows against the walls. Soren sat by the window, the cool night air brushing against his face as he stared into the streets below. His fingers drummed lightly against the table, a habit he had once had when plotting strategy in the thick of battle. Now, those same instincts were shifting toward something darker, something far more personal. His past had returned, and with it, the unresolved tension of unfinished business. Darius Vane, still alive, still dangerous. The thought weighed heavily on him. Darius had always been more than just a rival, he was a constant reminder of Soren's failures, the price of betrayal. Their feud had been one of those rare battles that left marks not just on the body, but on the soul. And now, the same politics that had driven them apart were clawing their way back into Soren's life. But this time, there was more at stake. If Darius was involved, it wasn't just about a personal vendetta. It was about the resurgence of power, the resurgence of the very forces that had shattered the Iron Wind Order. Soren closed his eyes, his mind flashing back to the years when the Order had stood strong. He had been their leader, their guiding force. They had been unstoppable, the best of the best, until Darius's betrayal shattered everything. Now, with the old rivalry surfacing, the Order's enemies would undoubtedly stir, bringing with them the dangerous politics of the martial world that Soren had hoped to escape forever. Aric's voice interrupted his thoughts once more. "What are we doing now, Doctor?" Soren turned to look at him, his expression hardening as the weight of the past hung heavily on his shoulders. "We keep moving forward," he said, his voice firm. "But we must be careful. The world we once knew is coming back, and this time, I'm not sure I can fight it alone." Aric stepped forward, his eyes filled with determination. "Then we'll fight it together, Doctor. Whatever comes next, I'm with you." Soren's heart softened for just a moment, and though he didn't show it, the boy's words meant more to him than he could express. In Aric, Soren saw a reflection of his younger self, a man once driven by ideals and purpose, unafraid to face the world head-on. But even Aric, in all his eagerness, had no idea what they were about to face. Soren's gaze darkened once more. The Iron Wind Order had crumbled under the weight of betrayal, but the politics of the martial world would never stay dead. And now, as the shadows of the past stretched longer and longer across Serethis, Soren knew that his true test had only just begun. The evening was settling in, a pale crescent moon hanging low in the sky over Serethis. The air was cool, and the bustle of the day had turned to hushed whispers as the city prepared for another restless night. Soren, Vale, and Aric Dawnfire walked in silence, their footsteps barely audible on the cobblestone streets as they made their way toward a small, secluded inn on the edge of town. Soren's mind was heavy with the weight of their investigation. They had searched for answers, but the pieces were still scattered, nothing fitting together quite as it should. The nobleman's death had been no ordinary accident, and every clue they uncovered seemed to point back to the same dark world, one that Soren had long since hoped to leave behind. But Aric, undeterred by the shadows of their past, had kept pushing, kept asking questions, kept searching. And now, Soren found himself reluctantly admiring the boy's persistence. "Doctor, we're getting closer," Aric said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I can feel it. There's something more to this. We've missed something in all these people we've questioned." Soren nodded, his gaze still fixed on the narrow street ahead. "Your persistence will get us killed one day, Aric," he said, though there was a faint trace of approval in his tone. "But I suppose we'll have to see where it leads." They reached the inn, a small, humble place with flickering lanterns outside and a faded wooden sign that barely hung from its rusty chain. It was the type of establishment where secrets were traded for a drink and information was bought with gold. A perfect place for someone who wanted to keep their identity hidden. Aric opened the door with a soft creak, stepping inside first. Soren followed, his senses immediately alert as the musky air of the inn filled his lungs. The place was sparsely lit, and a few travelers sat at the bar, murmuring amongst themselves. The innkeeper, a portly man with a balding head, glanced up briefly before going back to cleaning a mug. "We're looking for a man named Thorne," Aric said, speaking to the innkeeper with a confidence that belied his youth. "We were told he might be staying here. He was seen leaving Lord Brennar's estate recently." The innkeeper paused, his hand trembling as he set down the mug. His eyes darted nervously between the two strangers. "I don't know any Thorne," he replied gruffly, wiping his hands on his apron. "And if you're looking for trouble, you'd best leave now." Soren stepped forward, his presence imposing despite his apparent calm. "We're not here for trouble," he said quietly. "But you'd be wise to tell us what you know. This involves more than you realize." The innkeeper hesitated, looking around the room as if he might make a run for it. But when his gaze met Soren's, something in the older man's eyes made him reconsider. He sighed and motioned toward the back of the inn. "Thorne, yeah, he's been here. But he doesn't stay long. You'll find him in the back room, behind the curtains. He doesn't talk much, and when he does, it's always about business. But I warn you, he's not someone you want to cross." Soren gave a slight nod, acknowledging the warning, before turning to Aric. Without a word, they both moved toward the back room, the heavy smell of alcohol and smoke growing thicker as they walked. The curtain to the back room parted with a soft rustle, revealing a man sitting at a small wooden table, a glass of dark wine in his hand. His features were sharp, his eyes calculating, as if he knew something no one else did. He didn't look up as they entered, but he was aware of their presence the moment the curtain swayed. "Thorne, I presume?" Soren's voice was steady, but the underlying tension in the room was palpable. The man raised an eyebrow, finally setting his glass down. "You found me. But it's a little too late for questions. I'm not in the mood to entertain strangers. But I suppose you've come for more than a drink." Aric, not one to hold back, stepped forward. "We're looking for answers. About Lord Brennar's death. And about the people behind it." Thorne's lips curled into a smirk, but there was no humor in it. "You think I have answers to that?" he asked, his voice low, tinged with a mockery Soren didn't like. "I'm just a small part of a much larger game. If you want to know more, you'll have to look higher up the food chain." Soren's gaze sharpened, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you working for, Thorne? What's your connection to the Iron Wind Order?" At the mention of the Iron Wind Order, Thorne's demeanor shifted ever so slightly. His fingers tightened around the edge of his glass. For a fleeting moment, the mask slipped, revealing the truth that Soren had already suspected. This wasn't just a random criminal. Thorne had ties to something far darker. "I'm just a middleman," Thorne said, his voice steady again. "But the people I work for? They don't forget debts. And they don't forgive betrayal. If you're looking for answers about the Order, then you'll be looking for a long time." Soren's heart raced. This was it, the connection he had been dreading. The martial world, his old life, was coming back, piece by piece. And now, Thorne was giving them just enough information to lead them into deeper waters. "We'll be looking for a long time, then," Soren said, his voice cold. "But we'll find you again, Thorne. And when we do, I'll make sure you regret what you've done." Thorne's smirk faded, replaced with a quiet wariness. "We'll see," he said simply, his gaze flicking toward the door. "But don't say I didn't warn you. Dangerous people are coming for you, and you won't know who to trust." Aric's eyes narrowed. "We're not afraid of danger. We'll take whatever comes next." Thorne's lips parted as if to say more, but he stopped himself. The message was clear. He wouldn't be of help anymore. Soren turned without another word, motioning for Aric to follow him. They exited the room and the inn, the weight of Thorne's words pressing against them. The deeper they went into this mystery, the more they realized just how far-reaching the poison of betrayal went. The mystery deepens, and the past is waking from its slumber. Will Soren and Aric uncover the truth behind Lord Brennar's death, or will the shadows of betrayal swallow them whole? The stakes have never been higher, and the danger is closing in. Don't miss what comes next. Join us tomorrow for the next episode of Martial Sword as the investigation takes a dangerous turn. Don't forget to like and subscribe.